we're almost there. There's only one more day, which means tomorrow my new book is out. And I got to mute this other tab. Hopefully you didn't hear that. I don't know if you did or not. But anyways, always do one thing. I got most of the things right this morning. I just told Rob I was 90% proficient. I forgot one thing, and there we go. Life is always about manifesting and fulfilling your destinies, I guess. And I knew I was going to mess up by 10%. Oh, well. Anyway, so I'm going to turn over to Rob. I've had him on, I think, the radio show I did years ago. I don't know, a couple times. Certainly, we've talked many a time and bumped into each other in the world of engagement and culture. So why don't you introduce yourself to everyone while I finish making sure I've got all the buttons going the right way?
Yeah, no worries. First off, Chris, excited to have you here. And by the way, even if you mess up 10% of the times, you've been doing this 30 days, you've had 3 free days, right? So hopefully
Right.
this was maybe one of 29, one of 30. But hello, everyone. Rob Catalano. I'm the co-founder and chief engagement officer at Work Tango. I've spent the last 2 decades, 20 years in the space of building companies with a people lens, but also as an entrepreneur in the business lens, just passion for creating great places to work, right? We spend a lot of our waking time at work. And if we can make that better for not only our own employees, but the rest of the community, it's why I get out of bed every morning and not bored at all after 20 years. So I appreciate you having me here.
So I was up in Vancouver last week. I'm back home in Orange County today. Where are you at?
So I am in Toronto. It is now getting cold. I usually have a sweater on at this point, but I did live out in San Francisco for a while. So I reminisce about those days when I didn't have to wear toques and boots and all that stuff.
Yeah. So those of you that are tuned in, feel free to pop in where you're from. We also would love to get your questions, love to get your comments. Even if you end up watching this live after the fact, when it's not live, we'll still see all of that. So if you have questions, you have comments, please throw them in. Love to know that. Now, I know that on two totally different coasts, but when I was in Vancouver last week, it was like 41 and everyone was like, it's really beautiful. And I'm like, it's freezing. I mean, it was brisk. It was beautiful. We did have it was nice and sunny day. People out riding their bikes in their shorts and t-shirt, and being the California boy I am, I'm like all bundled up and ready for a snowstorm. So
I hear you. I was outside yesterday and people still in shorts, and I lost it. I lost it all when I went out west.
yeah. So let's talk about engagement and culture. I know you've been involved in the engagement world for a very long time, and which of course naturally is a part of I think the cultural conversation, culture world. And I've really been kind of focused in the culture world for a long time. So let's maybe talk about what are companies getting right about engagement right now? Where are you maybe seeing them stumble a little bit?
Yeah, so I think where companies are doing really right, I'll kind of reflect back on a model I've been working with in terms of how do you build wonderful employee experiences and engagement. And although you can do everything to help make people's work better or worry about them from a personal perspective and more human culture versus an employee culture, or whether that's making people grow, you can try all that stuff, but unless you have a foundation of your culture, which is your purpose and what matters to your organization, kind of the who you are versus, what you do, as well as what I call enablement, like enabling your leaders and enablement through technology. It's really hard to activate the employee culture and engagement that you want. So I think a lot of people are focusing on, if they're focusing on the purpose part of things and those foundations, then I'm seeing a lot of impact and influence. On the contrary, if people are just throwing programs and bake sales and things out there to employees to try and drive engagement, without that foundation, it's hard to really move the needle.
Yeah, and so I think I'm seeing, at least through all these conversations, kind of a redefining or re-upping on the definition of culture, of that how we get things done, right? What are the norms of the company? And ultimately, is this a good place to work, an intense place to work, a crappy place to work? Is this a place that you leave feeling like you're doing something great, something of meaning and purpose, or a place that you feel like you're getting a paycheck and your soul is slowly dying? There's all these different types of places we've all worked at before. And engagement feels like the thing that we're trying to do to make sure employees are happy. And we can do recognition. That's an important part. We can hand people gift cards. We can give raises and promotions. Um, but there's like a certain amount of like, I feel like there's only so much you can do on the engagement side if the culture itself, I guess, is not being true to itself, is not living up to its values, is not, maybe the way in which we get stuff done around here is just toxic, right? Or I don't know. We value this, and yet we let the main salespeople like act like complete asses because they're making their number, right? We just ignore that little problem. So, you know, how much of engagement sort of has a ceiling if ultimately the culture is struggling?
Yeah, I think it's back to that foundation, right? All those things you mentioned. You can have an amazing level of trying to measure and drive wonderful engagement. You could try to recognize, reward your employees every day. You could try to have better growth and performance development conversations versus performance management. But at the end of the day, if it's not aligned to a North Star or a vision of, again, what you want to be or your cultural values or what I call our passion statement as an example of Work Tango, it's really hard to align everyone in that same world. But I mean, you talk about a lot with your narratives and books, and culture isn't something you just do to people. In my mind, you're putting up the guardrails in terms of an environment where culture can flourish. But unless you think about it at that level, all the programs in the world really aren't going to drive it forward, right? At the end of the day, people, I hate bringing up Maslow on these types of podcasts, but there's base needs, but you need more, right? And I think those base needs, like a good comp structure and some perks at work, it's not enough to get people to actualization or fulfillment. So I think the ceiling is really low if you're really just trying to program your way there versus a thoughtful employee experience strategy.
It's interesting you brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs because I have not heard that name so many times in such a short period of time than I have over the last 2 weeks. And I wonder if that's because we have sort of two wars happening, in the world, and there's a lot of outside factors happening that we are talking about, like the basics, right? Of do we feel safe? Do we feel like those basic needs are being met before we can ultimately then be great at work or do the things we need to do or be good parents or be good spouses or whatever that role or thing is. I just wonder if maybe the outside forces, those things happening in other parts of the globe are starting to push on people, because I literally, that if I had a dollar for every time I heard Maslow in the last 2 weeks, I'd be a millionaire. And of course we know it. We hear it occasionally, but it's just been this constant Maslow, Maslow, Maslow. I'm going, geez, what's going on with people? But it's a good reminder, right?
Yeah. Usually when I'm speaking in front of a group, I'll ask people to raise their hand if themselves or a very close person, partner or child, left a job for less money ever. And 90% of people's hands go up, and you kind of ask why, right? Well, people aren't looking to work for a company anymore. They want to work with a company. It kind of gets back to some of that culture components, right? It's an environment that they can thrive in. It's one that is more purposeful than just coming to work and getting a paycheck. And I always cringe when I bring them up, but it has some merit in terms of how we're thinking of the world. But you bring up the current environment. I think people are also, there's a lot of introspection in terms of how do we make sure we're focusing on the human, like I said, not the employee. And definitely is a tougher time to build engagement in your employees. And it's not just that's going on. It's major business transformation and change management. It's struggling with remote and hybrid work. It's struggling with building more diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultures. It's just it's been compounding over the last couple of years, and building an experience the way you used to do it before to engage and inspire your talent. It's not going to work. It has to evolve with the modern employee, modern workforce, and modern environment around us at the end of the day.
Yeah. We've got a great question here from Craig. I hope I'm saying this last name right. Siebert. It could be Siebert. Anyways, I'm manifesting my terrible pronunciation of people's names. So I got the Craig part right. But the question is, what are some of the challenges to companies that have 50,000 people plus? And how do you tackle some of those when it comes to creating buy-in for a culture or a culture change? So I certainly have some ideas, but I'll go ahead and let you start, Rob. What are some of those challenges or things that they can do at that level?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges are clear, right? How do you build a unified culture with that much reach, probably in different parts of the world? And one of the main, I guess, components of success I've seen there, pardon me, is if you have that level of alignment on who we are and what our culture is. When I talked about those two foundations, one is culture, the other one is enablement. It's really trying to leverage not only technology and agility, but also leaders. I believe leaders are the secret weapon to helping build great experiences. I always say arguably, but I would argue all day that your leaders have the biggest influence on building great employee experiences and great culture in a company. And without an alignment for those leaders of why we're here, what the messaging and narrative is in terms of what we want to build in terms of our culture and employee experience, they're the folks we need to lean on, enable, and focus in order to make that a reality. I'd even say, even at a couple of thousand employees, that's critical. But when you get to those, 50, 100,000 person organizations, again, you can't control every experience and every moment. It's those leaders that companies that start enabling really, really well. Those are the ones that start seeing, again, higher engagement, more flourishment from their talent.
Yeah, I think we certainly see companies at that scale, that size of employee count, that they're very, very clear about their values and what their culture is. You see very clear, very dedicated senior leaders when it's going well, right? We're talking about when it's going good. Very clear, very active senior leaders around that message, around what those values are, kind of living and breathing it. And then absolutely, to your point, the only way you drive that message, the only way that continues to be true in the organization is if the leaders then from the senior down, right, are all doing their best to do it as well. And I would say that's the number one thing that people bring me in to speak about when I go into organizations is they want their leaders to get more training. I want their leaders to be exposed into more ways in which and give them more help so they can deliver that message. And ultimately, the senior team is saying, this is what's important. Conversely, in companies that are struggling at that level, where you're seeing mass layoffs and their brand is struggling, their profitability is struggling, it's clear that the values are fractured and there are so many subcultures inside the organization that sometimes when you see like these big layoffs that make no sense, like the company's doing really, really well, and you're like, why did they just go lay off 10,000 people over there? Because that subculture got so strong, they're so fragmented, right? It's easier to get rid of those people and then bring new people in and maybe try again. Let's retrain them again. Let's maybe try to get our shit together when it comes to culture, right?
Yeah. And if we want to get really tactical about it, right? Like from a leader perspective, how are you enabling them, right? Are you enabling them with the right programs or training or learning? Another form of enablement is, what are you having them do to their employees? And what I mean by that is the culture to do an appraisal once every year? Like you're not enabling leaders to, them to come up with a random number in their head to define compensation. Are you giving them data on how employees feel once a year? You know what I mean? Like, are you building an enablement structure that helps them build better experiences for their employees? And then again, from another tactical level, like, yeah, measuring engagement's important. I work with companies on that all the time, but are you measuring from employees' perspectives, are leaders living those corporate values? Are they living the passion or however you define the competencies that matter to your leaders? Because then you can start using that data to define who's next future leadership in the company or see what's working and what isn't. And just a couple of tactical ways to think about, especially at a company that scale, let alone any scale of, what are our leaders doing? Do they have the data and feedback loop to help improve themselves?
Yeah, and I mean it's so important, and yet we do see examples where they struggle or they're not doing that type of thing. I mean, you bring up a great point about the annual review and the annual survey. I mean, if that's all you're doing, it's literally a chore for everybody. It's not an active part. It's not a real process of trying to get people to get better or to help them understand or to do career development. You're certainly not actively listening to what your employees want if you're asking them once a year on like some giant survey that takes you 3 months to even like look at and 3 more months to like look at the data and then 3 more months to come up with solutions. And next thing you know, it's almost been a year and you come back to them with, we heard you, right? I had a company ask if I would look at their data pre-pandemic data to come up with some ideas and and I'm like, pre-pandemic data? Like, I, I think
I
things have
blocked that time out of
changed.
my mind. I don't even know when that happened, when that was. Um,
But
but
that was the last time they had surveyed, right? And it was like, oh my gosh.
I jokingly, but like truthfully say this and sometimes offend some HR folks, but I feel that sometimes leaders are the face of shitty HR practices. Unfortunately, they are, right? Like we put them in those situations. We don't enable them to have the right conversations, data, structure, rituals to build the experiences that are important. And I talked about them being a weapon. They're so critical in building that experience, but we put them in situations where it's really hard for them to be successful.
Yeah. Now, certainly, so Craig had another comment about, kind of measuring once a year, kind of saying how that needs to be rethought. Maybe we should dig into that a little bit more. We used to do a week. I used to do a one question survey every week. It was just for my direct reports, and just to kind of get a temperature of where they were, what was going on. We did a one question survey for the company. That gets to be a little bit difficult if you have 50,000 employees to do that and then try to, again, you're at the same disadvantage of trying to look at all that data and be able to do something with it. But I always thought that could have been broken down into subgroups, like, a senior leader who has maybe a couple hundred people under them, they could do a one question survey and certainly understand what's going on. Are there other ways in which you might suggest that we take that temperature, that we get that data on a more regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years, really specifically with a lot of companies. And it's what I call an active listening model. So first off, yes, you can measure engagement, right? And most companies are getting a lot more frequent in that. To your point, the data becomes stale. So if you can get a level of measurement, some companies are doing monthly, some quarterly, some even weekly or bi-weekly. But the idea is, one, how do you have some level of trending to be able to deal with smoke before fire, right? Is trending going up or down on major measurements of engagement, but also the things that drive it. Now, that frequency comes with smaller questions, whether that's 1 or 3 or 5. But the real magic isn't just about measurement, it's about diagnostic feedback. What I mean by that is, if you just do, the evolution was the annual survey, and then people just started doing pulse surveys. It's like, let's do the same survey every month or every week or every quarter, and then people tune out. When you start asking diagnostic questions about, what do people think the company should be doing? Hey, we just launched something. Is it working or not working? It allows you that agility to move and change to build a better employee experience at the end of the day. So from a model perspective, if you think of it in that lens, more frequency plus engagement plus diagnostic feedback is where you start building experiences. That being said, it's not just about engagement. It should be across the whole employee lifecycle, right? So it's whether it's their experiences on DE&I, whether it's their experiences onboarding, through change management initiatives, et cetera. So it's really critical to think of it in that lens. And I've seen a lot of companies just move the needle faster and better when they have that layer of measurement. And people always ask, oh man, there's got to be survey fatigue. You know what? There's no such thing as survey fatigue. There's lack of action fatigue. I work with companies that get feedback weekly, daily, to your point, but they're doing something about it. And employees are happy, more than willing to give you feedback if you're going to do something about it. To your point about, a large organization or structure around that, and maybe Craig, who's, works at a giant company, in order to get buy-in, I've seen some organizations have either a department or a country add one question to that cadence. Now they're bought in. They want to see the data specific for their team, right? You only show that question, for example, to a subset of employees. So there's just some ways that I've seen organizations really move the needle when it comes to changing their listening strategy.
Yeah, and that's really great advice, because ultimately what we're saying is, do it, customize it. There's not one size that fits all. But the most important thing is, if people feel like they're being heard, meaning, they're giving you that information on that survey and you're doing something with it, right? Whether that's coming back and hey, this is what we asked, this is what we heard, this is what we think we heard, did we get it right? Or these are the action items we're going to do. Or, hey, we know that sucks, but there's nothing we can do about it, but we heard you. Like, we can't always fix everything, but when you're showing people that you heard them and you're doing something about it as best you can, I 100% agree with you. I never had people that didn't fill out surveys. We always able to get surveys, and I was doing it on a weekly basis. Never
Yeah.
had a chance. I mean, if they were on vacation or something, sure. But like other than that, they always filled it out because I always came back, told them what we are going to do about it. Right. We're very clear. And so of course they're happy to tell you because you're trying to make their job better. I mean, I'm literally the machete man out in the rainforest, just trying to clear the path for them so they can do their job better. And if you're that kind of leader, you're going to get survey data. You're going to get people talking to you. It's not a problem. I think you bring up an excellent point that I hope people hear, that if you're doing nothing, then you're going to get nothing back.
Yeah, you actually bring up a good point about the way I like to think about it. There's two types of employee voice. One is satisfaction or dissatisfaction, right? Like, are you happy or not? But that's not enough. You need what I call participative management. Hey, what should we do differently? What could we do differently? Now they're not just a passenger, they're helping support the decisions, or in many cases, hey, we heard from you. We can't solve all the world's problems. What would you prioritize as the first top three things that we can cover this quarter? And now they're a part of that. They're part of solutioning it, owning it, etc. One last thing I'll say, Chris, is just to bring it back to leadership. We just talked about enabling leaders. So many companies, when I first meet them, they're doing the annual survey, like you said. It takes 3 months to get the data. Then they take another 3 months for HR to sit with every leader. And by that time, again, it's stale. We're not really enabling them. What I see companies finding a lot of success in is that data going in real time to leaders about the engagement or whatever you're measuring for their teams. Again, I don't know why companies have leaders as like they're filtering the data and they can't look at this data. They're your leaders. They should be able to see the raw data on how employees feel. So they have ownership on it. So that's just an example of enabling your leaders with real-time data. And the other part of it is you can't fix all the problems in HR, and a one-size-fits-all solution will not help every single employee and every single leader, especially if you're a large company. That's when those leaders have to have accountability to adjust and maintain the experience and the feedback for their respective team. So it drives me crazy when I see companies say, hey, we're not going to show the leaders the data. Oh, no, let's not show them the open-ended comments. We might offend them. It's like, they are your leaders. Right. They need that data to get better. You preach feedback all day long, but won't give real feedback to the leaders.
Well, I've also seen they're afraid of some leader figuring out who it was, and they're going to go and target them. And so listen, if you got a bad leader, you need to go deal with the bad leaders. If you can't show the data because your leaders suck and you're afraid that they're going to go back and do something they shouldn't do to the people, you have bigger problems, right? Like, it's literally a band-aid for a much larger problem. I will say there are situations where I did ask questions where I told everybody, listen, I'm the only person who's going to see this for this particular question, or maybe the questions for the next month. I'm going to ask some really serious questions that I'm going to give that opportunity to have full confidentiality, normalcy. I may repeat the sentiment of what was said, but I'm not going to put the actual words out, because I might ask, things that are really sensitive, or maybe they only want me to see. But for most of the time, it was not only are we going to share this data with the leaders, we would share the data with everybody. Everyone got to see the survey results, right? And the next week, I asked, what should we be doing better? What aren't we seeing? How could we, improve as a company? And all of the answers, and that was their choice to be anonymous or not, right? The employees, that was up to them. We shared it with everybody. There's no secrets. If we got a bunch of really shitty data that week, everybody saw it. Guess what? It was on us to go fix this problem, right? There was no hiding at all. So it's a great point you bring up.
You nailed it, right? Accountability, right? There's actually a feature in our platform when an employee fills out their survey, the first thing they see are the results in real time. Like, how do you give them, and there's an incentive for them to actually give you feedback because they get to see how they feel versus their colleagues, but it's full transparency. And then it's, hey, let's solve these issues together versus there's this black box of data that we're never going to show you and decide what the top 3 themes are for 2024 to help fix engagement, right? Like, it's backwards. Make them a part of the conversation. They're giving you the feedback in the first place.
Well, and I mean, isn't it like why we often will click on a little mini survey online, because we want to see how everybody else voted, like what they thought. Not only do we want to contribute our own information, but we want to know what they think as well, or what everybody else thought as well. So it's sort of the same thing. So I don't know. This, like I said, this is the day 30. The new book, The Power of Company Culture, second edition, comes out tomorrow. If you're able to pick it up between
Exciting.
8 and 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we're trying to get to the bestseller list there on Amazon. If that's just too much for you and you want to pre-order right now, go for it. That's cool. But I'm super excited. I was able to double it, improve all the areas that I wish I had done differently. You know, if any of you have ever done a book, the moment you hand it over, you go, "Oh, I know I should have done that differently. I should have changed that." Um, I even had a random stranger come up to me one time in like a train station and said, "Are you Chris Dyer?" And I go, "Yeah." I go, "Do you know on your book on the 12th page you have a misspelled word?" It was like, "Thanks, random stranger."
It's real. It's real,
it,
uncut.
it's real. So we fixed everything. And added case studies with NASA, VaynerMedia, Neiman Marcus. There's lots of cool stuff on there. A great quote from Rob in there. So I hope everyone will check it out. Sir, thank you so much for joining me on the LinkedIn Live, YouTube Live. We're on Instagram Live. We're on Facebook Live right now. I think we're just about everywhere but TikTok because we couldn't figure that one out. But always good to catch up with you. I hope you stay warm here in the coming very cold months of Toronto. You're always welcome back to the West Coast if you need a break.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Congrats. Excited to see go live tomorrow with the book and enjoyed the first one. So excited to get hands on that one.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. All the great questions. And I'll be back tomorrow for the final 31 Days of Culture and the book release. So hope everyone has a great Monday, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Take care, everyone.